So what large organizations have had decades to build, D2C brands have potentially months to build. So I think what's changed is the consumer. What's not changed fast enough is marketing. The more technologically driven a product is, the more humanization it needs. We don't have a dearth of data. We have a deluge of data. Can you get in without an MBA? I think it's become more difficult over the last few years. If I can't get a sense of all of this, then dude, you're not a marketer. You're essentially just a running ad. You will fail. So it's very, very important for people to realize that early on, rather than just have the superhuman ideology that I'm never going to fail.
Hey there. Welcome to an exciting podcast with Samriddh Dasgupta, the CMO of Heads Up for Tails. Samriddh has an incredible career spanning 2 decades, working with several industries and a lot of founders. I believe it spans across education, healthcare, grooming, and now recently pet care. I am aware I missed a lot of segments as well. But very excited to have a conversation about his journey, his learnings from all these amazing segments he's worked upon, and discuss a lot more about D2C and the pet care industry. Welcome, Samriddh, and thanks for your time.
Kavan, thank you so much. And delighted to be here. Thank you for a very generous introduction. You haven't missed too much. I have had the privilege of working with different kinds of businesses and on different kinds of challenges through the last 18, 20 odd years now. We'll get into that as we go through the conversation, but generally, thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege.
Oh, it's the pleasure's all mine. We've got a bunch of things to cover, so I'll jump right in.
Sure.
And yeah, the first question is, to know a lot about your journey. Um, you know,
Okay.
it's been 18, 20 years, as you said. So what was that first moment you decided that, marketing is what you want to focus on and that's what you want to build your career in?
I actually didn't. I think I'm an accidental marketer. So I grew up in a family which was full of academics and people who were in advertising. Alongside that, I had one side of the family which was from the forces. So I had an acute mix of hyper discipline but also hyper creative individuals who were forming my uh, sort of childhood. I never decided that I want to be in marketing, but I had a sense that I wanted to do something which would help express my potential to the best that I could. Um, Incidentally, post my graduation, I went into the army. I met with an accident and I came back. Um, and two very divergent fields. The reason the army happened was I was always into sports, and I had a brother who was in the army, cousin, and I was deeply influenced by his presence. So I took the CDS, I took the SSB. I cleared both of them in the first go. Then I went into Officer Training Academy. It was an 11-month course. Around the seventh month, I had a bit of a mishap and I came back into civilian life. So no regrets, but it was a fantastic experience. When I came back, I decided that the only other fallback option that I really had was knowing how the media services work, how creative services work. I used to do voiceovers before that. I used to work in film production before that as part of my family setup. So I think I landed into it in some degree of a predestined state, but I never really wanted to be in it. And when I got into it, I realized that this world is really, really fun. So I joined an advertising agency, which had just sort of taken off. I was the fourth person to join, part of the core team, and we remained in the services industry for about 10 years. So that was my schooling, literally in terms of marketing, right? So
This is ABM.
this is ADM. Yes, yes. ABM, very non-creatively named. It was essentially advertising, brand consultancy, and marketing. I used to lead the brand consultancy and marketing side of it. The advertising side of it was led by my partners who were way more creatively oriented than I was.
Okay.
I essentially was a thorough numbers guy who could just potentially speak to people and understand what triggered them. And that still keeps me in good stead. So this is 2004 to 2015 or early stage of liberalization. Um, you still had a cash-rich economy, and you had manufacturing setups which were just getting the right kind of economic treatment from the government. There was a lot more labor-intensive conversation that was happening across infrastructural growth. We had a country which now had the second generation of founders who had come back from global schools, and they wanted to do more. They wanted to go digital. They wanted to, create the first Facebook page. They wanted to get out there and meet younger and newer consumer sets. So it was a very exciting time. So the 2004 to 2015, I think, was one of the best times for the country when you look at the way we grew around that curve, where people just were more demanding. People were globally traveled. Enterprise was at its highest, and small and medium enterprises across India were really seeking to find some amount of guidance and some amount of support in terms of building their brands. So I was very lucky that I had started off in that journey. So yeah, it was first 10 odd years of advertising, and then now 10 odd years of just building brands and being on the marketing side of it. So a lot of people go from advertising to marketing. That's not a very different journey for me. I
Right.
did that, and my first marketing stint was Dineout, where I joined as the head of marketing. We grew the business, and then from there, I have been working consumer tech and consumer products for the last 8-9 years.
Wow. I mean, I wasn't aware of the whole army story, so I actually want to unpack that a little bit. So, how
Okay.
old were you when you decided to come back?
So I this was right after graduation, so 21. Um,
20.
so
And what did you
yeah,
study? Something?
I studied English literature in Delhi University. I studied at this college called Ramjas. And right, and so in the third year, when people start to prepare for their CAT, MAT, JAT, GMAT, God knows, all the 80s, uh, I, I went a different way. I prepared for the UPSC, which was essentially the CDS, the Combined Defense Services. That takes place around the same time as the CATs take place, and then immediately after that, I went into the army. It's a good experience. Yeah, they take about 80 of you down. So I went to Bhopal. Take 80 of you down there, and they reject about 78. So thankfully, I did not get rejected. Yeah, it's a very interesting experience because you don't know the criteria for rejection, but you do have a sense of what it could potentially be. So people keep coming back and they keep trying, right? And it's one of those things that I think our
Mm.
country has been built on the back of. You keep trying, right? And especially when you want to get into the army, it's a decision that is not based on the money that you earn. It's a decision that is based on the life that you eventually want to live and leave for your family, right? But yeah, I was very lucky that I made it through the first one, and then I went to this place called Officers Training Academy in Chennai. I think some of my closest friends. Remember, I said I have very close friends. I have a small set of friends. Some of them remain my course mates from the army, and we still meet up whenever they're in town. And now they're, of course, lieutenant colonels, colonels. They're doing well. They're doing well, and and yeah, I think the amount of service that they have driven for this nation is just phenomenal.
Right, right. I mean, it must be quite a bummer, I mean, clearing your this very difficult exam and to come back. And
Shit
then,
happens. Okay, listen, life is all about that. Shit happens. Okay, was I disappointed at that time? Absolutely.
yeah,
It made a huge difference to me, right? Because I had already missed all the cat mad zats. So
yeah,
1 year was gone. I couldn't potentially imagine doing anything else. I was in physical pain. I was in emotional pain. I did not know what else to do. I did not have a plan B. That was my entire plan. And in retrospect, not having a plan B was pretty much one of the stupidest things that I had done in my life. But I didn't, right? Uh, and it's okay. It's okay because it took me a bit of time to come to terms with it. So it was tough when it happened, but beyond that, it just became a steady process of realization and then finding the next thing, right?
right,
And I think,
right.
most of marketing throughout, I have realized is that, right?
Yeah,
You go through a process in marketing where you have a great idea, you implement it, it may fail, it may take off. If it fails, then you still have to get out of that very quickly and move to the next. So early stage ho gaya, theek hai, yaar, at 21, 22, when shit like that happens, it's okay. You don't have too many challenges in life.
yeah.
You're still fit, you're still okay, and you move on. Yeah. Can I do it again today? No, of course not. I just wouldn't have the muscle to do it. Yeah.
There's much less risk involved. I think I've
Zero risk.
always been
Zero risk. Zero
yeah,
risk. Okay. For people who have had the luxury of growing up in a metropolitan city, uh, having sorted education, the the advantage of English as a primary language, there's zero risk. There's nothing. So
Right.
did I come out of it worse? No, man. I think I came out of it better. It's a great story to tell. I still end up telling it some or the other than like I'm telling it now. You will fail. So it's very, very important for people to realize that early on, rather than just have the superhuman ideology that I'm never going to fail, because you're going to fail. So one thing that is not a variable is failure. You're going to have a setback.
Right.
You're going to fail. You potentially. So it's like this, right? The person who takes the cat and doesn't make it through the A, B, and whatever the ABC or whatever it is. Is it C or is it K? I don't know. But if you don't make it through the top three, right? So I think Ahmedabad, Bangalore, and maybe Kolkata. I don't know which one is the third.
Right.
If you're not making it through the top three, then have you failed because you've gone to a different island? No, potentially not. But in your mind, you might find that to be a setback, right? I know of people who have not got through IIT Delhi and IIT Kanpur and they've gone somewhere else. They feel really bad about it. Have you failed? No. But it's potentially a setback, right? Every little thing that happens to you has its own nazariya of success. I think the quicker we get to a realization point where the world's prescribed format of success doesn't really apply to you, whether you are in a job or in your personal life, I think we'll just be happier people, man.
In your case, and again, I hope I'm not
Yeah,
wrong, but from what I understood right now, you came back at 21, did maybe some time with
yeah,
doing freelancing, etc., and then you
yeah,
joined a new advertising agency
yeah.
where you were essentially part of a very small group without really having that big background of running the show.
So if you
So
say, when you say
yeah,
group and you mean four people, yeah. So I'll tell you the four people. Okay, it was me. It was the founder who wanted someone who could do servicing, planning, creative, media, voice, everything. So that was me, Man Friday. There was an accounts person because neither of us were account people, and there was an office PM. So
wow,
yeah,
okay, so basically
and
two
we
of
used to have, yeah, potentially two, three of us.
But how did you decide to like go down that route and not really go to like a bigger agency?
Good question. Two things. One, I didn't know if being in a large agency would have given me the kind of exposure that I got during that time in a small place. So, okay, I'm going to philosophize this just a little bit. Okay, and it's important. At least I find it important. In the initial 3 to 4 years of your career, okay, in the initial 3 to 4 years of career, you are essentially going to be someone who is like a sponge. Okay, you need to soak every little thing that you can get your hands on. Every little. Okay, there can't be one thing that you are not aware of. Now, what happens in large spaces is that you are part of a sliver of a sliver of a sliver. And I had seen that play out, right? So I'd seen that play out in different capacities, and I didn't want that. So the first 3 4 years, I was very clear that if it came down to generating an invoice for a client, I wanted to know how an invoice is generated. To that extent, right?
Right,
मतलब अगर कंप्यूटर में सॉफ्टवेयर डालना है वो भी मुझे आना चाहिए. I don't need an IT guy who's going to come in and do that. Right?
right,
So for me, the first 3 4 years is you're a sponge. Now you've already absorbed everything that you can absorb, right? So सब ले लिया तुमने. Now what happens is you're still in that zone, but the next 3 4 years you're letting go of a few things. Okay, you're letting go of what you don't want to learn. So you know that this is not my expertise. I don't want to get into it. I don't want to get into this field. I don't want to get into this area of operations. I don't want to get into, let's say, legal. I don't want to get into finance. I want to get into marketing, right? So now over the next 3 4 years, which is pretty much in your fifth or sixth year of your career path, you have been able to figure out what is it that you really want to do. Now this could be as siloed as within one function what you want to do, or it could be as broad based as what I was doing, where in large scale business what your intentions are, right? Now what happens is you've gone through the 6 7 year curve and you have been able to grasp everything, learn everything, figure out what you're good at, figure out what you intend to do. Then after that you start to build some expertise. So the reason why a large agency would not have worked for me at that stage is that I would have had to choose something which would have been decided by someone else.
the ownership you get and the control you get over doing what you want to do and deciding what you want to learn today is great. There are a lot of downsides. I'm sure you know it better than
Oh,
me.
you're gonna fall flat on your face multiple times, but that's okay. At least you have fallen on your face because of what you did. किसी
Exactly.
दूसरे ने किसी दूसरे ने टांग नहीं अड़ाया.
Exactly.
गिरे हो
Otherwise, you
तो
get
अपनी गलती से गिरे हो.
when you don't have control and you fall on your face, you feel stressed out. Other than,
Yeah,
but
man.
if you do it yourself, I don't feel that I have that stress. I feel okay, I can do better and I know exactly what I did wrong. And I have the control to actually undo things. So I hard relate to that bit. Um,
Yeah,
I wanted to like now just talk about like from what I see, right? You don't really have that formal education.
yeah,
And right out of your small stint, which obviously you scaled over a decade, you
yeah,
joined as a leadership level role in
yeah,
a big company that time in a
yeah,
organization like Times, right?
yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit more about that, right?
How did
Because
that
usually
happen?
how did
How
that
did that
happen?
happen?
And what's your stance on like, I mean, I always hear people saying, no, if I, like you said some time ago, I am nahi hua, to I'll never become, a big person in a big company. And obviously, that you've proven that wrong. So just your take there and how did that happen, of course?
So, two things. One is that you have to be acutely aware of what large companies need at what stage in their career.
Hmm.
All organizations go through different life cycles. Now, during these different life cycles, they need people who have different skill sets. When I entered the Times group, which was the larger group, was extremely focused on building Times Internet as a center of excellence. Okay. Within Times Internet, there were very specific businesses which were being bought over with the ambition to scale up. Now, Dineout is one of those classic examples where it's been scaled up and now it's owned by Swiggy. Right? I think the reason they and how it happened also, I'll tell you. I knew someone at Times Internet, and I had already worked with them in some capacity. Uh, they were very clear of what kind of an individual they needed. They needed someone who had the potential to lead a large enough marketing team. Now, I was already leading a 120 member team, right? So for me, even at an agency, when you're leading a 120 member team, and we weren't very small, by the way. We were clocking about 4 crores a month. So it's
Wow.
no, yeah. So in terms of billing, we were very sorted, right? Whether money was coming in from the marketer, that's a separate thing. But we were billing well. We were debt free. So we had created a business which was debt free. We were a 120 member team, as I mentioned. We were spread across 2 different locations. I was leading about 17, 18 different kinds of brands. The reason I moved on after 10 odd years is because I had a massive burnout in advertising. Being very honest with you, right? I was extremely tired physically, mentally, emotionally, and intellectually to some extent. Uh, but the mandate that the Times Group had at that time was to have someone who had worked with large teams. The Dineout marketing team was going to be a fairly large team. Had exposure to consumer tech and consumer products. Understood India really well. Because at the end of the day, the Times Group is fantastic when it needs to sell to India, right? So when you need to sell to India, Bharat, I don't like these terms, man. I think they're fairly obfuscated terms. When you want to sell to an aspiring Indian consumer, right? Now that person can be in a tier 2 town, but has the potential to come to Delhi and go to a lovely place and party and have a good time. So I don't think this Bharat India divide is one of the best divisions there, but it's one of my most unpopular opinions. But I generally believe that they needed someone who understood India. They understood the Indian consumer set. They needed someone who was going to be able to drive creative excellence and operational excellence. They needed someone who understood the technology side of the business and someone who had led large teams. Now, when you look at these things, there has to be a certain amount of experience in place. And I think I was in a good space at the right time. Broadly that.
Hmm. Hmm.
But to your question, can you get in without an MBA? Can you get in without one of those more formal degrees? I think it's become more difficult over the last few years. Uh,
Hmm.
it's potentially become more difficult. But having said that, I think there are too many people who are out of too many colleges now. So now when I hire, my marker is no longer whether you're an IIM grad or you're not. And we hire a lot of people from tier 1, tier 2 MBA institutions. They're part of our product team, they're part of the marketing team, and so forth. But the marker is not that. The marker is creatively what you bring to the table. Okay, so there used to be a disproportionate advantage somewhere in the middle where you would be from a top tier institution. I still respect top tier institutions. I think they build rigor, they build depth, they build a fantastic network. They enable you to look at problems from multiple point of views. I think it builds what I call the muscle memory to get into an organization and sort of start firing from day one. But there are lots of people who have worked in emerging businesses, smaller businesses, who also build the same kind of muscle because of the rigor that they've had at their work. Um, you have to be very clear about what value you bring to the table, and you have to be able to articulate that value really well. I think one thing that I have been able to do well uh, is whenever I met someone who potentially has a problem to solve for, don't wait for them to tell you the problem. One, understand the problem that needs to be solved. So when I meet founders whom I potentially want to work with, I would have already assessed the market. I would have already assessed the space and stage that they are in. So when I'm walking in, I'm not walking in as a blank conversation that, hey, I'm sitting on my past laurels, so look at me and hire me. That does not work. I think you need to put in hard work, and you need to ensure that every day, whenever you're sort of trying to do something new, you're putting in the homework that is needed, right? And I'm scared all the time. I was scared then. I'm scared now. I'm scared every day. Primarily because I think that there is going to be someone or the other who's going to do a better job than me and take my job away. Period. Right? Will that happen tomorrow? No. Has that happened in the past? Potentially no. Right? But if you're not scared, and if you're going to sit and and you're going to gravitate, you think, because of what you've been able to achieve through your academic rigor, uh, then I hope you're right. But more often than not, you won't be. There is going to be someone who's going to work harder than you, be more street smart than you, be more creative than you, be more execution oriented than you, be a better team player, be more humble, be kinder, be nicer, and potentially just a more likable person in the room. And I'm going to hire that person over any bloody degree that comes my way. I think corporations and institutions are getting more aware of it as we speak. So they start to index on all of this a lot more than just that one degree. Uh, so I don't think people should be worried. I think people should be fundamentally very clear about the narrative.
Right.
So what
Right.
value you bring? Are you willing to put that extra work and articulate that value for the person you want to get into? You'll be surprised the number of founders and CXOs who reply to cold emails. So don't stop cold emailing people if you want to get in. More often than not, they're not looking for pedigree,
Right.
right? They're not
Absolutely.
looking for pedigree. Okay, so I think we're at a stage in our life cycle where pedigree does not equate impact.
Hmm.
Pedigree equates hard work. I'll give that much.
That's so well put, Samriddh. I think I really like the whole paranoid point. I really feel. I think Socrates said it, where it's like always the good and wise people will be paranoid, while the fool
Oh, I am.
is good, thinking that I'm great. I'm ignorant to the fact that I'm bad. So basically, I wanted to now segue into just asking you about how the marketing environment has changed. You've
Yeah,
you've been on the agency side almost for a decade, then
yeah,
another decade from the brand side.
yeah.
How's it evolved from, like, what do you think is like one evident thing you are observing where the before and after is drastically different?
A lot, yeah. I think a lot has changed. So I think
Mhm.
that's a different thesis altogether. But I'll tell you what's changed fundamentally. Okay. What's changed fundamentally is the way that the consumer looks at brands now and the consumer looks at products now. And for a very long period of time, the decision making tree was extremely linear. So you would go see something, mostly you would see it on a shelf, in a local kirana store or an empty store, modern trade store. Sorry, jargons for people who they'll be like, how do you see something in an empty store? In a modern trade store. Uh, yeah, that's a good one. I think I should use that as a Twitter joke. But in a modern trade store, people would walk in, people would see things, people would buy it. Emerging, e-commerce things came. It was mostly just product listing. People started to look at those as a marker. Um, but now, if you look at consumer behavior when it comes to purchasing anything, and I mean almost anything, okay? I mean, a classic example is a couple of days back, I wanted to refuel my car and I went to a petrol pump and they were doing that ethanol petrol mix. So I actually stopped the car on the side, I first read up on the ethanol mix. There was a line already, okay? And it's not like I have all the time in the world, but I still stopped the car on the side. I said, okay, that looks interesting. I'm going to go. I'm going to read up. I read up on it. I wasn't convinced. I went on YouTube. I watched a video. All this potentially has taken me about 7 or 8 minutes. I parked the car on the side. Others have gone in and they have filled whatever they have to. And then I go in and decide, okay, fine. I decide whatever I decided. But if you look at it, I think what's happened is, one, the consumer composition has changed. Okay? The consumer understanding of products have changed. Their expectations of brands have changed. Their journey from sort of a need/want to the final purchase and then coming back has completely changed. It's evolved to a point where I don't think anyone who claims to understand it also understands it really well. Okay, it's very fragmented now. So I think what's changed is the consumer. What's not changed fast enough is marketing.
Okay.
And I know a lot of my colleagues will hate me for it, but I think what's happened over the last many years is that we have stopped becoming creators and storytellers, and we have become people who are trying to orchestrate things according to what we need them to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't really work very well. Honestly, it doesn't work very well. Okay. So what's happened with marketing over the last many years, and advertising for that matter, is that we have lost the charm, and we have lost the magic, and we have lost the delight of what used to be classic storytelling. And we have gone down to the depths of data crunching, which is absolutely fine. Nothing's wrong with it. But we have not evolved as much as what the consumer has evolved. Okay? And that's my perspective, and I might be completely wrong. We've got some things right. We have become data richer. We have become a little bit more wary of doing the wrong things when it comes to language, communication, content, and so on and so forth. So a lot more sensitivity that's been built into, and cultural sensitivity, which was extremely important. I mean, I don't think that we are going to now go back to an era of advertising or marketing where we will, and hopefully we don't, where we will commoditize women to a point where it just becomes absolutely unpalatable, right? So I'm hoping we don't do stuff like that, right? So we're taking better decisions when it comes to storytelling to some extent, which is also very culturally nuanced. I think we become a lot more sensitive to the needs of marginalized communities when we are telling stories, and I think that's super important. We have also become far more respectful of the language diversity of this country. So that's a good thing. Have we done all of this with the intent of building it into a playbook? Not as yet. And that needs to be done. But the good thing is that there are younger folks who are coming who will not be borrowing from the past. And a lot of us borrow from the past, right? So, I mean, at a certain stage and age in our lives, we end up borrowing from the past. There'll be a lot of younger folks who will come who will not borrow from the past, who will create interventions which are technologically a lot more inclusive and wider distributed. Every marketeer is going to be a content creator. According to me, that's going to be one fundamental change that will happen. Okay. The reason why I think I have been successful in marketing and in diverse sectors and across different kinds of challenges and different life stages of a company is because I love the art of writing. So now when you build a craft and you hone that craft, so I can write well. Okay. Now, fundamentally, I know that I can write well. I can write well, I can take good photographs, I can think of videos, and I can think of music and so on and so forth, right? So it goes back to my formative years. Because I can do that, I think I've been more successful than others. Because that's helped me to convince people to take better decisions. Okay, a marketer's job is fundamentally to enable the board, enable the organization, enable consumers, enable your customer service department and your product team and so on and so forth to take better decisions. So you bring a lot of inputs from outside in. You play on those inputs. You create something that is meaningful for yourself and the business and the community that you serve. And you convince a bunch of people through this journey that whatever is being created is the best possible thing. Right? That's your job as a marketer. You're there to enable a business to take better decisions. The best way to enable someone to take a good decision is to show them the outcome of that decision. So if you know how to articulate that thought, if you know how to articulate a campaign, if you know how to make it look good, if you know how to write it well, and if you can wear the content creator's hat, if you can wear the orchestrator's hat, then you potentially are going to be able to convince a lot more people to do this much faster, right? So I think the next generation of marketers, the way I look at it, are all going to be content creators. They're going to be fantastic writers. They're going to be designers. They're going to be video people. They're going to be people who are living their life on the social platforms. They are going to come back outside in, and they're going to say, your brand or our brand needs this, right? So the brand is a much more living, organic, open, dynamic. It's not an institution anymore. It's an individual now, right? And I think institutionalized brands fundamentally lack the rigor of experimentation, whether it's communication or product. They also, in some form, lack agility. But individual brands, Heads of Hotels for me is a very individually driven brand, individually built brand, back on the founder, not institutionalized as a lot of large organizations are. And I've also worked with large organizations to understand how that works. But marketers are fundamentally going to start looking at brand building and performance and growth as individualized spaces and not institutionalized spaces. You need to be a content creator. You need to be a content disruptor. You have to bank on data, but you can't afford for data to decide everything. So you have to be very clear about what that data set is telling you. You have to understand technology better than most other people, man. And honestly speaking, let me be fundamentally clear. The more technologically driven a product is, the more humanization it needs. Okay.
Right.
So if you don't understand the technology, you can't humanize it. Okay. So you can't sell tech on the back of tech. No one cares for tech. Okay. Tech is fucking irrelevant. Okay. It's no one needs, the world doesn't run on technology. The world runs on the outcome of that technology, which is deeply humanized. And I think that's what marketers need to do. Now, whether it's a product or it's technology or it's a service or whatever it is that you're being able to sell, you have to humanize it. You have to individualize it. You have to have that creative aspiration to tell a better story. You have to be able to disrupt that storytelling in some or the other form. You have to have a marketability of the assets that you create. And you can do all that once you yourself are a content creator. You can't be someone who's sitting in an office and say, hey, I know how to sell to people. You can't. You have to be out there, right? And if you're not watching all the right things, then you are not really getting into it. So go out there and please watch Rocky Rani Ki Prem Kahani.
No, earlier on, when we used to do a lot of sales for Indie Folio, I remember I heard from someone saying that you're talking too much about your features. You should really talk about how it actually changes my life. And
Yeah,
that was one of the first cues. When I was like pretty young, I realized, okay, my entire communication plan needs to change, and that made a big difference. I
yeah.
actually touch upon Samriddh one point, which is about you mentioning how marketing is not changed, but the consumer has changed, and maybe we are
I just don't mean,
too
I mean, it's not changed fast enough. I don't mean
fast
it's not
enough.
changed at all. It's just not changed
Right.
fast enough. So what happened is that the consumer grew very, very fast because of a hand me down. The 2000s were all about hand me downs. We had cousins and friends and family who would come from the US, right?
Yeah.
And they would leave things with us. And we'd be like, fuck yeah, why don't we get all of this in India? Okay. We started to get this in India now. And now
Right.
they tell us, oh, you know what? We are well beyond that. Now we have gone to something else.
Yeah.
Right? So we are getting a kick out of something else. And, oh, you guys are still stuck in that because you get it now. No, this was the early 2000s, right? So I'm talking about early 2000s when suddenly you would have had an influx of things from the Western point of view. And then once you are able to sort of see that there are Indian brands making it, the West would have already gone through it. Now I think we have played catch up very, very fast and very, very well. Right? One, because India is a larger distribution market for the best in English ways. Second is there are Indian brands who are extremely well attuned to what is on trend in the West in some or the other form, right? And then we are creating our own trends, right? So we have our own export,
Right.
which could be a turmeric latte or whatever you want to call it, but we have our own, right? So we have our own sense of what we want to leave for the world.
Right.
But whatever the world is also leaving, we are getting that in now. So when you look
Right.
at the transformation, I think that's really where the marketing transformation has potentially not been as fast as what the consumer transformation is. So I'm not saying it's not changed at all, but the consumers have evolved faster.
I understand. And so, you mentioned maybe data is influencing us too much. And
Yeah,
from what I've at least heard and learned, right, you mentioned there is so much segmentation right now within India
yeah.
in terms of ICP. Um, wouldn't data then kind of help you contextualize that further? Can you tell me more about how people are using data too much and it's actually not doing the job well?
So we don't have a dearth of data. We have a
Hmm.
deluge of data. Okay, so India is one of those phenomenal case studies when data is not unified. One household doesn't have one unification or one unified way of looking at data. Um, I have multiple phone numbers. I operate across two different email addresses. I have multiple addresses linked to me. Sometimes I'm buying for myself, I'm buying for others. I'm buying for my parents, I'm buying for, let's say, my in-laws, I'm buying for my cousins, I'm buying for so many different people, and those are all consumption patterns that are being tapped into the larger ecosystem. Um, because I have had multiple phone numbers linked to me, it's potentially dirty data, which is with a bunch of systems. So I think here is where the larger challenge is. Okay, dearth of data allows you to build modeling where you know what data to look for. Dirty data pushes you to build models which are backed by an abundance of data, but you don't know how to clean it up.
Hmm.
Now, what happens is when you base a lot of your intelligence, a lot of your focus in terms of whether it's product or it's process or it's pricing, so on and so forth, on large scale data, then there is a problem. Okay, because I think, and forget I think, I believe that the intelligence that it takes and the rigor that it takes and also the bandwidth to clean up dirty data into meaningful data for yourself, only very few organizations in India have that, right? Because you need skill sets for it, and you need the patience for it, and you need investments for it. But
Right.
most emerging businesses can't do it. So most emerging businesses start getting data in and they're like, oh wow, now there's so much, I don't know what to do with it, right? Classic example is D2C brands where you have one person who's created two different accounts, three different accounts. They keep playing around with referral, they keep playing around with codes that go here and there, and yeah, they're gamifying the system because the system's out there to be gamified, and that's okay. But the fact of the matter is that for the D2C brand, it's two different customers. Till you don't get in the depth of it and you say, hey, it's going potentially to the same place and the names are the same and whatever it is, right? So I think data is great if it's extremely clean and it tells you the story that it needs to tell you. You have to know what story you want the data to tell you. If it doesn't pop out on its own, a lot of people won't recognize it. So you need to know what you're searching for. I think the best kind of data, and I have maintained this, that it doesn't matter what stage of your life cycle and what scale you're in. The best kind of data is when you are on the ground and you're speaking to your customers real time. Okay. The second best kind of data is when you have a bunch of customers who are repeatedly coming back to you. You call them and you ask them very specific questions, so you understand their behavior. The third and potentially an even more important set of customers are the ones who came to you but don't come back to you anymore. Okay, so for me, those are the three things. Someone who's buying real time or browsing a product real time at a store, if you are lucky that you have a physical presence. If you don't have a physical presence, then you have to do it in a much more harder, sort of more concerted way. But I mean, there are ways of making that happen. Second is that people who are buying from you regularly, right? And potentially you also want to speak to people who have bought from you for the first time to understand why they bought from you. But you were sitting on a gold mine when you speak to people who bought from you and haven't come back. And that tells you so much more about what you need to build.
Right.
So I think when organizations start to double click on these 3 or 4 data points and they build qualitative hypotheses and not quantitative hypotheses, I think that's really where the advantage is. If you're going to be only looking at the quant side of it, then you will miss what makes your consumer your potentially best friend and your worst enemy, which is the nuance and the emotion that they bring to the table. So quant doesn't tell you that. Okay.
Right. Right.
Quant tells you who to look after, who to go for, and how to build that journey, which is great. Rely on quant for that. But definitely put a quali lens on top of that.
Samriddh, I want to now jump into a little bit about heads up for tails. And
Yeah.
I'm going to read this so I don't get this wrong,
Yeah.
You mentioned, I think it was a LinkedIn post or a Twitter post, I can't recall, but
Okay.
you mentioned that my relentless obsession for head over heart was holding me steady till I came to heads up for tails. So
Yeah,
tell
man.
me more
That's a
about.
LinkedIn post. It was my reflection on my first year.
So can you tell me more about like how you ended up joining them, and a little bit more about how your stance like fundamentally changed about how you make decisions.
So I joined them because I believe in the purpose and the mission. So I met Rashi and Samarth. They run the business, and I met them through a venture cap fund, and we were trying to figure out what impact we can bring to the world, especially the world where humans and animals need to coexist. Um, and I have been a pet sibling and a pet parent for many, many years in my life. And, sometimes just one of those ikigai moments. Uh, you know that it's a category that needs building, uh, build categories. In the past. You understand that it's a delightful journey when it comes to brand and communication and storytelling and so on and so forth. So it's a beautiful space. Uh, so that drives me from a value perspective. You also understand that that's what the world needs. The world needs a behavior change. The world needs a course correction in the way they look at animals, especially community animals. And if I can have a small, potentially a meaningful role to play in that, I would enjoy it. Right. So it's something that you look back at. So I came on board because of that. The mandate still remains true, and the passion and the vision and the mission remain absolutely constant. I don't think we have deviated from it. We have only made it stronger. So that's how I came on board. How it changed me as an individual when it comes to decision making, and I think it changes a lot of people who walk into the organization. There's a unique culture to this organization. It's beautiful. In most organizations, the first question that you ask is, "Dhanda kitna aega?" Right? Now, the fact is, because the brand operates from a certain sense of comfort, uh, which is actually more than comfort, a certain kind of confidence, and I think that confidence builds comfort. Um is the fact that we have done right by the community that we have served. Now, because we have done right by the community we have served, we understand that the community will always come back and potentially keep supporting us through commerce. They'll buy from us. They will be attentive, retentive. They will give us all the necessary sort of love that is needed from a consumer side. Right. So, with a very high NPS and an extremely strong repeat structure, you get confident with the business. So you start to decide things slightly differently. Now, I don't know if this applies to 0 to 1 journeys for a lot of people, but I know that Rashi was applying this lens even when she was at a 0 to 1 stage, right? I hadn't met her then, but more power to her. I think she started applying this lens from day one. Hence, the culture of the organization is this even 16, 17 years down the line, right? Which is, does this add value to us as a community, right? And us as a community is the heads of a tails family, heads of a tails system, right? Value is in bunch of forms. There's commercial value, there's intellectual value, there is moral value, there is some form of even what I consider to be spiritual value, right? And if you're extremely happy doing something, then you feel more elevated and more aligned to things. As long as we get potentially 2 or 3 yeses, we are okay. Right? So that's one decision tree. Does it add value back to me? And when it's adding value back to you, you are trying to see, is it commercially right? Is it intellectually right? Is it spiritually right? Is it functionally right, and does it add value back in these many ways, right? So if it does, spot on, right? That's a good decision tree. Second is this going to add value back to the community that we serve? Are they going to learn a better way of doing something? Are we going to enable them to do something better? Are we going to enable them to do something that they have not been able to do before? And are we going to change health, happiness, and wellness? Right? Again, we need at least 3 of these things to be right. Right? So
Right.
so our check boxes actually keep increasing. The third one and the final one is it needed now?
Hmm.
Okay. So ruthless focus on prioritization and doing things that are needed now. So do it now. Okay. If you think that it's needed now because it's going to impact the tomorrow, do it now. But do you think it can be done at a later stage because it's got no impact on today and it might potentially have no impact on tomorrow or day after? Don't do it.
Don't do
Okay. So one, the focus is very clear because it has to push the mission and the vision forward, right? And the mission vision is to keep delivering delightful products and delightful services and experiences to pets and pet parents, right? So that has to happen. Does it meet my mission statement? Does it meet my value statement? Does it make sure that my pet parents are going to have a better life? Are the pets going to have a better life? Are they going to be healthier, happier? And is this going to add some amount of intellectual value back to me, emotional value back to me? And while it's doing that, is there a commercial value that comes back to me? More often than not, if you get all the other things right, the commercial value is always there. That's one thing we have realized. But if you only solve the commercial value, you don't get the other values. And because you don't get the other values, then you are in a rut, because you have not been able to emotionally get someone involved in that journey.
Right.
So for us, we first get people emotionally involved in the journey because we are able to empathize with them and create things that are genuinely meaningful. We are all pet parents. So when we create something, whether it's a product, service, or even an experience, we are very clear about how we would want it to be for our pets. And then only it goes out. So we have a very strong barometer when it comes to whether you call it a moral compass or whatever it is, but that barometer is very, very clear.
Right.
So I think that was a fundamental change, where earlier it would be, you have a product, how many units of this can you sell? Can we make this much return on that investment? Can we optimize things beyond this particular number? Does our funnel increase, and are we getting more consumer based capacity built? And important markers, those markers are also here, but they're intrinsic to the way we do business. But the decision tree is very different.
This kind of an approach also is really showing in the numbers as well, right? Where I think so far, at least the new D2C wave is a lot of impatient folks and marketers who are like a B, let's run fast. And I think these folks have been doing this for several years, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah,
It's
16. This is going to be the 16th year now.
16
And we are in
years.
we're going to complete the 16th year. What we have been able to achieve as a marker, I think, is phenomenal, because most companies fizzle out much earlier. But again, I think when it comes down to that, right? If you started with a mission and you find alignment with the rest of the community that you serve with that same mission, then there's no reason for you to stop. You keep going on.
Right.
And I'm just going to try and put a perspective to what you said. I'm not trying to correct you, but I'm trying to give you a perspective. I think most D2C brands need to run fast. I think most D2C marketers need to be impatient.
Okay.
I think the fundamental of D2C is that you have to run fast, and you have to fail fast, and you have to learn from that very, very quickly. You have to reinvent that wheel. Marketers have to be impatient because they're playing with capital. So there's a massive amount of capital responsibility. Okay. So when you look at it, D2C business, and I don't call it D2C in the sheer website sense of it. I think any brand that is going to a consumer side is a direct to consumer brand. Their distribution channels can be anything. The responsibility of capital on that business is so high now that if you're not impatient, and if you're not iterating, and if you're not learning, and if you're not failing, and if you're not being supremely demanding from market and from yourself and your team, you'll do disservice to that.
Okay.
So what large organizations have had decades to build, D2C brands have potentially months to build.
Wow.
Because the risk of failure is so much higher. Because the risk of capital failure is so much higher. Right? And people's lives are linked to it. People's jobs are linked to it. So I think impatience is important. Frugality is important. Right. Ability to question decisions and really sort of get to the grind of it is super important. We do that at Heads of Hotels. You don't see it. People don't see it. Right? So people don't see us as a hustle-driven brand. But when you're creating a category, you're hustling every day. Yeah? There is no fixed supply chain for the business that we are trying to create. We are making our own stores. There is no fixed playbook for it other than the playbook that we have created. The market is not as organized as a BPC market or an FMCG market or an electronics market. It's not as organized. There are far more regulatory frameworks that apply to food and treats and pharmaceuticals and all of that. So we do all of it. We run a services business. Again, it's deeply unpredictable. We have a retail front, and whether it's rain, it's cold, it's heat, it's riots happening on the ground, whatever it is, it gets impacted. So we have an extremely volatile, fluctuating business on multiple fronts, but it all comes together because of the maturity of how the organization has been built ground up. Okay, but you still have the hustle of the day. You still have the grind of the day. You still have the ambiguity of life, and you still have all the variability of business. It's just that at our scale, whatever decision we take, we just take a little bit longer to take that decision because the impact of that is much higher, right? Because of the scale of our business. But it's the
Right.
same as any other D2C business, where when you take a decision, it's still going to impact, in our case, it impacts thousands of people. In a younger, more emerging brand, it's potentially going to impact hundreds of people. In an absolutely fledgling brand, which has just started, it's potentially going to impact tens of people. But you're still going to impact human beings, and the number does not matter. The impact, the depth of it, or the lack of it matters.
Right.
Right?
Right. I want to understand a little bit more about why speed is important. Like, is it capturing the market in the right time, or is it that the money you're raising and spending, like you need to kind of show a good trajectory? Just trying to
No,
understand
it's not
where.
the latter. It's definitely not the latter. So
uh,
I don't even want to touch that. It's definitely got nothing with capital responsibility. I think the capital responsibility is to make sure that your return on that capital is much higher. It's not to burn that capital. Okay, so that's the first part. So let's keep that aside. Let's answer the question for what the question is. I think speed is critical for two fundamental reasons, man. One is that there's a lot of choice in the market right now. Whether you like it or you don't like it, there's someone who's building something or the other which is extremely close to you, right? So speed is important for survival of the brand and the business, period.
Mm,
Uh, there's nothing esoteric
mm,
about it. You have to survive, you have to have speed, right? And my firm belief is 80% there first to market is more important than 100% there and last to market. Because that 20% delta, it's not needed. Okay, you will keep iterating, you'll keep making it better. So 80% there first to market, far more important than 100% there and last to market. Second is there's only so much mind space that you can capture. In today's world, your mind is cluttered, I am cluttered, everyone is cluttered, right? So like right after this, I'll go on to another meeting, and then I have two other things to do in the day, and then something or the other will keep happening, right? So we'll forget about everything. We forget about things as we go ahead in life. And there's only so much that we like to retain, and potentially we can imagine retaining. Mind space capturing only happens when I'm able to be the first one to come and tell you I can solve a problem for you. If I'm the third person to come and tell that I'm going to solve that problem for you, then you don't really remember who the first two were. You'll only remember the last person who told you that, hey, there is a problem that I can solve for you. So I don't want to be a brand. I don't want to be a business which is sitting around trying to make things absolutely perfect. When I can get out there, I can put something out there that solves the problem in the form that the problem is, and learn from you and give you the next best version and the next best version and the next best version, right? So for me, speed is
right.
absolutely critical when it comes to survival, business longevity, mind space capture, share of wallet, and retention.
The way you mentioned, like even for a brand as old as you, if you're starting a new category, I mean, you're again in a race. So
Every
I think that
every day
really,
is day one,
really,
yeah. Every day is day zero, day one. We
yeah,
are
correct,
we
correct.
are failing. We are making new things. Some things stick, some things don't stick. But you got to keep trying, yeah. And you got to have hustle, and you got to have speed, and you got to have the rigor, and you have to reduce decision making to a point where two people can decide things,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And if two people can't decide it, then you have the wrong people. Okay, it's
Right.
not a process failure.
Fair
Then you
enough.
just fundamentally have the wrong people. So then people need to be able to decide across different levels. Okay, so if my team can't decide that the problem that they want to bring to me is a problem that they should bring to me, then I fundamentally have failed. Okay, when they bring that problem to me, if between me and the person who's brought the problem we can't decide what to do with that problem, then I have failed. Okay, now
Right.
if
Right.
the problem is taken to business, and then between, let's say, me and another management person we can't decide what to do with that problem, then we as a business have failed, right? So
Right.
at every step of the way, if there are more than two people who are trying to decide on anything, then believe me, that system is going to fail. People are going to fail because there's too many heads trying to do what these two people could have potentially done if they were either the right people, or they were empowered to do it the right way, or they had the right set of information. Human beings are
Right.
fantastic at deciding. We have just stripped people of the confidence of deciding.
Fair. So, uh, uh, I had another question for you. So,
Yeah,
uh, I've seen that you folks have, if I'm not wrong, 80 plus stores span India,
yeah,
and I've increasingly seen successful D2C brands. I think Mama, Lenskart have also gone with this whole omni-channel approach. Do you
Yeah.
feel that in a country like India, that's a strategy all D2C brands need to consider? Or what's your take on why an omni-channel experience is needed?
The answer is yes, it's super important because India still shops over the weekends when they go out as a family, and we enjoy that time. Don't look at India as only an indicator of what happens in high rise societies in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore. It's not like that. Or Gurgaon, more Gurgaon
Mhm.
actually, less Delhi. Um, Experiencing things together is something that India has enjoyed and the Indian consumer has enjoyed for many, many years and will continue to do so. Okay. Going to a mall is still considered to be a fabulous weekend experience. Um, Trust gets built when you see things offline. Um, while we are now a UPI driven market to some extent and still a cash and a UPI driven market, our credit card penetration is still extremely low. So that gives you a sense of how instrumentations of finance are also still deeply inclined towards what can potentially be done in smaller markets and emerging markets where the banking systems are not as mature. We are also looking at a stage in life cycle where you have a younger consumer set, which is between the age groups of 16 to 18, uh, who are going out and experiencing things and then coming back and potentially using their parents' profiles to buy things. Or even if they're using their own profiles to buy things, their cards are linked to the parents. So, the profiles are like that. But the discovery of the product, a lot of it is happening offline. Now, is it critical for all D2C businesses to be in it? Kind of depends on the unit economics that you play with, man. If you have a large, so how retail works, and I'm going to break this down very quickly. Okay, there are three formats to retail. There is a pull format where the brand will pull people. Okay, so the brand is going to pull you. If you have a product on the shelf, it's going to pull the person in for commerce. So that's a pull market. Okay, um, classic examples are of course large scale D2C, large scale FMCG brands, some D2C brands like the Mama Earths of the world, and so on and so forth. Uh, the Whole Truth, Mom's Co. Well, quite a few of those examples, right? Far lesser in electronics, but I'm assuming a boat on a shelf will pull people into the store and say, "Hey, mujhe boat de do," right? So like that. Now that's one side of it, which is a pull. Then there is a push market, which is you're not a popular enough brand, but you have extremely high amounts of gross margin that you can pass on to the dealers and the distributor. So now what they're going to do is they're going to give you top of shelf. They're going to give you a counter top, and they're going to make sure that when you walk into the store, they push that product to you because they make higher margin on that product. Market gets built. So automatically that push over a period of time turns into a pull because people start to enjoy the product. You have to have extreme amounts of confidence in your product for that. So only do that when you're extremely confident about it. You should have tested the market in some of the other format before you go down that model, right? Now, the third format, okay, which I don't think D2C brands can do. Most of them can't do. Uh, is just sheer volume. Okay, it's volume. There is no pull. No one's pushing it, right? I'm creating volume by opening my own stores, right? So I'm creating volume of footfall. I'm creating volume of eyeballs. I'm creating volume of interactions, consumer depth. I am putting capital behind it. So it's a capital intensive piece. But now I'm no longer going to rely on my dealers. I'm not going to rely on distributors. I'm not relying on shelf discoverability. I'm not relying on the brand having a pull mechanism where they will automatically walk into a store. None of that. I am putting my own store, right? Because I want to control that experience. I want to make sure that there's data richness of that omni-channel integration between me, between the retail platform and the digital platform, and so on and so forth. I want to be able to give people a seamless experience. I want to learn from one platform and sort of push that back to the next one. So when people walk into a retail store, they're more oriented towards talking to me. So I'm going to learn from them and I want to push that back into product lines that go online. I'm going to ensure that there's a loyalty reward, referral program that is in play. Now that's the model that a lot of D2C brands are going towards, right? So you see individual standalone stores of a lot of these players. That's super important because
Right.
that's one way of building an omni-channel experience. It's one way of creating consumer depth through unification of data. Your identifiers of consumer
Mm.
behavior become fairly more standardized. So it's not dirty data. Remember, we've spoken about that. So it's not that. It's clean data. It's your own data. It's first-person data. You have it because you were there in that moment of consideration. You were there in the moment of purchase, and you have been able to
Right.
engage with people, right? That's phenomenal. And I think more businesses as we go ahead would potentially be built on the back of that. When you're in a when you're in a large scale distribution setup like a modern bazaar, a Spencer, a Limarche, and so on and so forth, there your data richness
Mm.
goes down because you don't really know who you're selling to unless you have someone who's standing there and really recording it, which is again a human intensive thing with a lot of bias. But your visibility and your depth of consumer awareness and understanding is much lower. So you're not really creating an omni-channel experience per se. What you're doing is you have an omni-channel distribution, or you have a cross-channel distribution. I don't consider it to be omni. I consider it to be cross-channel. I think that's really where one needs to look at the difference between brands going offline and brands owning offline. Um, I think brands going offline is very, very clear because you have super distributors and you have dealers who are going to take your product and put it on the shelf, and then you are happy because it's got a new distribution channel to it. But brands
Right.
owning offline is when you have created the real estate and the experience zone for people to come in. So we are a classic example of that. But in our case, we started offline and then moved online. But there are a lot of
Okay.
online brands which are now going offline, right? So Mama Earth is
Right.
a classic example of that, and I
Right.
like the stores that they've built. Nika is another example. I think they've done a phenomenal job in terms of how their experience stores are. So yeah, I think it sort of comes down to that whether you want to own it or do you just want to borrow it. If you want to borrow it, then you're on borrowed shelf, borrowed store demonstrators, borrow sales folks, and borrowed data because that's all that you have. But if you want to own it, then you have to have the capital patience to own it. You have to have the capital depth to own it, and then you need to be able to put a unification of technology layer on top to ensure that the data that you're capturing is put through the right consumer journey mechanics, and then you're building enterprise knowledge by doing so.
Great. I think again, great playbook for anybody who's deciding, about going retail. I know, we are towards the end of our session, so just a few quick questions for you, Samriddh. Um, um, Another advice we usually get is, pick a customer and focus on one thing, you know.
Yeah.
But what I've seen with Heads Up for Tails is you've got so many, services, products, various touch points. So what's the reason behind that, and when should I look at doing more for one customer versus just focusing on one product?
Okay. So two parts of the question. One is how much focus is good, and second, at what stage do you realize you should not focus, right? It comes down to life stages. It comes down to life stages, man. I think when we were younger, we were very, very sharply focused on building our own product lines, right? So we were very clear that our product portfolio is what we will build, and we still are. We are very clear that that's really where our growth curve is, right? So we export, we have a very strong manufacturing unit, so we have all of that. But we have all of that because we focused early stage in building that capacity,
Mm.
right? So early stage focus was let's build ourselves into a manufacturer and not just a trader. So when you start with that focus, you built it. Now that you build the manufacturing capacity, you should not remain manufacturers of only one thing because now you have the necessary skill set, you have the gumption to go out there and do more. So what now you see is, and we're still vertical commerce, right? So at the end of the day, we're a pet care business, so it's still fairly verticalized. But we don't consider ourselves to a pet care business only. We consider ourselves to a parenting business, right? So now when you change the lens from pet care to parenting, you realize that there is a full scale life stage, life cycle that needs to be um, catered to and built for.
Right.
So what you see potentially as, hey, they're doing so many things is because our consumer needs a solution which they can trust, which enables them to do all these things any which ways, right? Um, are we doing it too late? I think we are potentially doing it too late. We should have
Okay.
started doing it a little earlier, if you were to ask me, right?
Okay.
But having said that, I respect the way that the industry has been built, and the industry needed the exposure and the inclusion of multiple brands to make people aware that there is so much.
Hmm.
So we had a very lonely journey for about 14 years. We were the only ones in the market. There was no one
Right,
else, right?
right.
So it's a very lonely journey when you're the only one who's trying to create an entire industry and a category. It's challenging,
Yeah,
right? But the moment you have more people who walk in, what happens is that the market starts to talk to each other, right? And then you realize that there is capacity being built. Consumer sets are evolving. Newer capital is coming into market. Newer ideas are getting generated. You have people who are starting doing something superbly energizing, failing, but then you learn from it, right?
yeah,
And now there is talent in the market. There is capacity in the market, right? Um, I think it's only been the last 3-4 years where we have had the market expansion, and that market expansion has enabled us to create more allied services and allied products. We hope that some of them stick. Um, we know that not all of them will stick. But again, it comes down to that. We have been able to build the confidence of that trial and error,
right.
trial to error in the last 14 years. We did not do trials to error too much in the first 6 odd years. So we said, whatever we'll manufacture, we will sell. We will try not to sell too many other things. We will keep our gross margins high. We will keep control on the product line. We'll build a certain amount of brand love. We will create an extremely strong NPS. The NPS comes down when people genuinely are happy with the product. So we will control the product. We will control the experience. We will control the feedback loop. We will make sure that the manufacturing only goes up and doesn't go down. So that was the first 6-7 years. Post which, okay, we have built this capacity. Now let's start to look at distribution of the categories and portfolios. Now it's about, hey, so many people have tried different things. The market is more aware of it. Let us also try to see how we can either consolidate it, aggregate it, or build new capacity that is going to help the entire industry and the category grow. Right. So I think it comes down to that. So yeah, I think patience first, impatience, and then being patient again.
Yeah. Got it. Got it. Wanted to just kind of end this podcast by asking you a last question, Samriddh.
Yeah.
You mentioned that, you're completely against lazy marketing.
Yeah.
I wanted to know from you, what do you define as lazy marketing, and how do you
I,
ensure your team
I think we
and yourself
spoke about
are not?
this in some form through the meeting. We have spoken about the
Okay.
laziness that I see in marketing a lot now, which is people being extremely comfortable sitting back and not going out there, not being creators, not engaging with customers, not sort of throwing themselves on the problem. Um, and and I think that's just fundamentally, when you don't pick up the phone and speak to a customer, okay, or you don't stand in the heat with the same customer in a line and try to figure out what that journey is, or when you yourself are not going into your sort of product and manufacturing, and you're not standing there, you're not standing at retail, potentially you're not standing where there's actual interaction happening, and you are relying on large scale data to build that awareness for you. uh, I think it's a little lazy, yeah. Okay, because brands are built on the back of what is happening with the consumer at the moment when they're discovering the product, and
Right.
then at the moment when they're consuming the product, right? It's so critical for marketeers, for storytellers to have such a strong, astute understanding of it. That's number one. I think second is this over reliance on influencers. And it's been something that I have spoken about earlier also. That don't rely on the influencer to dictate the the narrative for you, right? And don't rely on too many influencers to create that maximum capacity for you. I have seen a lot of brands throw a lot of money on the problem.
Mm.
Okay, I'm not a big fan of it. I come from extremely frugal means. When you run your own agency, you're extremely frugal. When you work with early stage startups, which was pre-VC, you're extremely frugal. You're more concerned about money being spent and where it's to be spent. So I think I have built that natural behavior. Uh, but I just, it's a genuine request to all marketeers, and I've done this in multiple forums. I've written about this also on my LinkedIn, that if you have to go to a KOL, which is a key opinion leader, if you have to go to one, then really craft the story beautifully. You know, Work with them, co-create with them. Yeah. One, don't try to dictate it. Second, don't leave it to them. Okay. It's a process of co-creation. And it goes back to my first point also, right? Building a brand is a process of co-creation. At some stage, you're co-creating it with the customer. At some stage, you're co-creating it with your founder and your product team and so on and so forth, right? Then you create the narrative, co-create the narrative with your key opinion leader. Then you co-create more narratives with your, user-generated content. Marketers need to get into the depth of the problem and start solving it by thinking about what kind of content should I create? I need to get my community involved in this content. I need to create a space where my community can come in and have conversations with me or with each other. I need to build some amount of a commerce funnel through this, but the commerce funnel can't be built purely on the back of commerce. It needs to be built on the back of purpose and mission and value systems. I am not going to rely only on this large scale data that I see lying on a dashboard. I'm going to go out there and get first person data as much as I can by interacting with people, engaging with them, and ensuring that I'm learning from their daily lives. I'm going to get into the emotional envelope of the brand and not only the practical envelope of the brand. Now, the emotional envelope of the brand is something that you discover over a period of time. It does not happen organically on day one. I'm going to make sure that I wear a hat which is business first, profitability first, founder first, and stakeholder first, right? But alongside this, I'm also going to wear a hat where I'm going to go extremely consumer centric. I'm going to try to figure out how can I make things better for them. The parameters of marketing have changed. I need to be able to understand technology. I need to understand shelves. I need to understand pricing. I need to understand distribution. I should have a fairly strong sense of supply chain. I should understand how logistics work. I really, really need to have a grasp on consumer delight. If I can't get a sense of all of this, then dude, you're not a marketer. You're essentially just running ads. There's a big difference between the two, right?
Right.
If you're here to run ads, then run ads. There's nothing wrong with it. Okay, the world needs you. I need you when I run my team. Absolutely fantastic, right? You're a marketer for that particular space, and that's a good thing. But if you want to build a career in marketing, okay, and that is really where it comes down to. If you want to build a career in marketing, which allows you to take larger decisions, enable an organization to take larger decisions, empower people to learn and grow, create capacity, which is talent, capital, and ideas, then you need to get into the rigor of the problem, solve it yourself, make sure that you're engaging with the right set of people who are your consumers and your stakeholders, and really build that optimum capacity where you are able to learn, iterate, change. Learn, execute, iterate, and go back through that same funnel over and over again. I think for me, marketing needs to get more in depth into the business rigor of it. That's about it, right? And if that happens, then yeah, then I won't consider it to be lazy. I think some of it is.
Got it, Samriddh. I think great point to end the podcast on. Thanks a ton for your time. I
No,
think
thank you so much for having me here. I hope this is of value to you and to the listeners. And thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Of course, I think there's so much nuggets of information you've given, and I'm excited to kind of put this out there and see what people think. It's going to be a lot of fun, and yeah, I think it's been a pleasure to have you. And yeah,
The pleasure is
thanks
all
for
mine.
everyone. Thanks for everyone to tune in. If you enjoyed this, just watch this space for the next one. See
Yes,
you.
thank you so much, and all the best. And I hope a lot of people watch all the other brilliant videos that are there on your channel. So yeah, all the best with that.
Thank you so
Thanks a
much.
lot. Take care.